Perfect. And we can get started. So, hey, everybody. Welcome to the week 7 Learn to Code single page application in React. This is more of a trial course. This is more of a test course. This is the first time we've run it. So far, we've been running smooth. In the next few weeks, the curriculum might change up just slightly. We'll see how today goes. I think this is the part where either we move really, really quickly through this, or we slow down and break it down individually step by step. And I'm trying to play around with the timing of how we're going to do that. But anyway, for today, what are we working on? If you've ever had any type of coding experience, let me know. If you're a complete beginner, that is completely okay. This is geared for complete beginners. And so for the first 6 weeks, what we've done is work through Figma, work through HTML, work through CSS, and now we're going to combine all of that into React. Last week, we started our first React project, and we saw the hierarchy of files, how to incorporate HTML into it, how to launch the application, how to navigate the folder structure, and then if I want to host this project live, how do I build it so I can just move a simple folder over and host it on a static site like HostGator or some other hosting site that is inexpensive. And with all that said, what are we actually going to build? So we're going to build out this whole thing in React. And this is just a simple, very simple single page application. And this is pretty common what you'll see on the web, maybe in advertising for a storefront or a law firm, or just some simple web page to describe something. This is just a basic web page with a hero section, section 1, section 2, section 3. It's a typical standard arrangement for a site, and maybe a little contact us form. We won't get into the functionality of the contact form until next week or the week after, and we won't get into routing, which will be these 2 pages, until a couple weeks from now, so probably 3 weeks from now. So with all that said, what are we going to do today? We're going to look at the hierarchy and components. We're going to look at how do we create the components, more than just the header and the footer, but all the components. We're going to look at how to arrange inside of our folder structure. And then if we have time, we're going to look at CSS style modules and how to incorporate CSS and break this down into small chunks. Hopefully today, you'll see a pattern emerging of breaking down code into its smallest component. So we'll see how to break down code into its smallest components, and that way we'll be able to make quick changes without impacting the whole project. So let's dive in and see what that looks like. I'm going to share out my Visual Studio Code editor, and you'll be able to see kind of where we are. So let me share out another application. Cool. So we've got Visual Studio Code, and in here I've got week 7. I know that might be a little bit small to see, but open editors, here's week 7 folder. I've got created a folder for this under a desktop folder called Learn to Code. So if I go to File and open a folder, I've got Learn to Code wherever you want this folder. For me, it's on my desktop, but for you, you can have this folder wherever. We've gone through week 1 where we did just basic HTML. Week 2, we did some more. Week 3 and week 4, we did some more HTML. And then week 5, we started to finally get into JavaScript and then incorporate JavaScript into HTML. So that is the basic essence of React. And then last week, we created our first application around React. And we walked through all of these folders, what they mean, and how to navigate them, and what's important and what is not. So today we're going to be doing a little bit more of the exact same as we did last week. But this time, we're actually going to create our web page and create it in a way that has a hierarchy so that we can then in future modify it without having to remember what's what. So in this folder, there's absolutely nothing today. And in our Visual Studio Code, there's absolutely nothing. In terms of tools for what you will need, if you want to follow along, you will need Visual Studio Code, and that'll be this editor right here. It's called an interactive development environment. And so you can download it. It is completely free. You will not have to pay for anything. So you can go to download Visual Studio Code. Be careful not to do the Visual Studio Microsoft. That is the wrong one. The more popular one is the Visual Studio Code this version here, and the web page will look like this. And so you can download it for your particular OS. It should come up automatically, download for Mac or download for Windows or download for Linux. It should come up automatically. Next, you will need Node.js. So you can type in Node.js, and this is something that just runs in the background. It's kind of like Python, just a compiler that runs in the background, but you will need to install it if you want to follow along today. And the easiest way to check if you have Node.js installed is not through an application, but through this terminal. So once you have Visual Studio Code installed on your computer, you can open it up, open up a folder, and go to Terminal and New Terminal, and you get this window right here. So I'm going to close this. I'm just going to Terminal and New Terminal, and it'll open up to the folder that we have today. And if you've never seen a command line, this is going to look very intimidating. It looks very scary, and it is not user-friendly. So in here, you kind of have to know what you want to type. But what I'm going to show you today will not break your computer. It will not alter your computer in any negative way. We're just going to look at certain commands. And so in here, I can type in node -- version, and it'll tell me what version I'm running in. So this ensures that I do actually have Node installed correctly. That's all we're really going to do today. So we're not going to do anything more with the Node command itself. However, Node does come with other packages or other programs within it. And one of those programs is called npx. So what I'm going to do, this will take some time to run, but it will kind of give an outline of what we're doing. So create dash, very careful, not an underscore, but a dash, react dash app. And so in here, we're going to type in npx, create react app, and then we're going to give it the application name. So I'm going to just call this one first app. Because this folder is empty, we can call it first app, keep it simple. So most of the time, you'll see first app as like a folder or a project name, or you might see my first app or first or something along the lines of like a basic app, something like that. So we're just gonna hit enter. I don't recommend typing along with me right now. What I do recommend is just watching what I'm doing as I'm explaining it. And if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. So, or if you want to unmute and I'm not able to see what's happening in the chat and you really have a strong question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, no problem. So this will take some time. And so last week we did kind of review what some of these packages are. And the main three that I would say derive React are these three. Beyond that, there's probably around 1,000 other packages that get installed. And what I mean by that is if I open this folder, just click on the down arrow and expand it, I've got this node modules folder. And inside this node modules folder is a massive collection of different projects that I can use. How am I going to use all of these? Absolutely not. But do they all come with React right on the install? Absolutely. And so these are all there. I don't need to know them at all. I'm not even going to look inside this folder very often. It's just there. Once I know this node modules is there, then I feel safe, like, okay, React is functioning properly most of the time. So now I'm saying like, hey, at the very end, I get this npm. Inside that directory, you can run several commands. So inside the first app, you can run several commands. So it's going to tell me here to run npm start, run build, run test, and run eject. We're not going to look at this command at all. We're not going to look at this command at all. We looked at npm run build last week, and today we're going to focus on npm start. So here we're just going to see what happens in the cd first app npm start. So we're just going to go to cd first app. And then I'm going to type in npm start. And what that will do is launch my project. It will actually set it up to where it opens up a web page and runs the entire project right here in my browser automatically. So once we ran npm run start, we see this nice little logo that's going around. We see edit source app.js to save and reload, and we see learn React. Cool. So this is a web page. Fundamentally, technology-wise, there's no difference between this and this. They're the exact same underneath the hood. So this is a web page. This is a web page. This is a single page application. This is a single page application. They might not look the same, but they underneath the surface are the exact same. And so we'll see how we can translate this this little logo spinning and all these little texts and links into this. All right, so inside of my folder, there's a source folder, and inside the source folder, there's a file called app.js, and app.js is going to be our friend. App.js is everything we need. And hopefully, if you're familiar with HTML or you've been following along with the course already, you can see inside app.js, there's this thing called HTML, and there's this stuff that hopefully looks familiar-ish. We've got a div, we've got a header, we've got an image, we've got a p tag, we've got an a tag, and then we've got closing tags, a header and div. And so, wait a minute, if I took away something or if I modified something in here, maybe I want to say I'm feeling a bit angry today. I'm like, I don't want to learn React. And I save that. Well, then if I go back to this page and I'm like, oh, okay, hey, I don't want to learn React. All right, so I've modified the page to suit what my need for expression is. And so I can do that over and over. I can do that up here in the p tag. I can do that here in the link. I can change React.js. So today, if we click on the I don't want to learn React, it'll go to react.dev as the link. Maybe I want to change that up to google.com. So www.google.com. So I can save that. And now if I go back to my page, it automatically refreshes and I go to google.com. So I can change my attributes. Now, if I can change my attributes, I can get rid of this too. So let's get rid of all of it. And let's well, actually, let me just get rid of all of this and we'll see the error that comes up. I'm going to save it. And this is going to cause some problems. It'll complain. Hey, module build failed. Syntax error. So unexpected token. This is such an unhelpful error. It doesn't tell me a thing about it. So the thing that I need to be very cognizant of inside every single component, and this little thing right here, this is what's called a component. We covered this in the JavaScript week, but I'll go over it again, where if you want more details on what a component is, you can refer to that video. But quickly, a component is basically a function. And there's a couple of ways to write it, but in here, they've written it this way out of the box as the base. In here, I do need some type of HTML, just anything at all. So I'm going to type in the standard use case of the div. This is all I really need. So if I'm typing in a component, at a bare minimum, I do need HTML components inside of the main component. So I need HTML tags within here. So at a bare minimum, I need HTML tags inside of a component. So I save that. And now our error goes away and I see this text at the top. At a bare minimum, I need HTML tags inside of a component. Functionally, this is a web page. This is a web page. They're both the exact same. This web page just looks terrible. This one looks like it's the best web page in the world. You know, this is really nice. So hopefully that was a little joke, trying to bring some levity. But at the bare minimum, we do need HTML inside of the function. So what are we going to do now? We're going to do what we've been doing. We're going to steal some code. We are going to go and copy some code that's already on the internet. And the code I'm going to take and how I'm going to take it is from View and Developer and Developer Tools. So inside here, every browser has developer tools. So if you're working with Chrome, Mozilla, or Edge, you've got developer tools in here. And again, it's under View, Developer, and Developer Tools. Mozilla might be in a different place, Edge might be in a different place, but for the most part, you'll have developer tools within the browser. And inside of here, I can start to see, hey, there's this thing called Elements on this tab up above. And I'm going to expand this out so we can see it. Hopefully this is visible, but we have Elements up here on the console. And then we've got CSS here on the side. To make it a little bit simpler, if you want to see the source files in HTML, this is not something you can see in React, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that in the future, not today. But we have our HTML, raw HTML, what we just saw, so all the elements, broken out into full HTML. So if I come to elements and I start to expand this, I can start to see each individual element, and I can start to see, oh, here's how they're all typed out, and I can copy them individually. Or I can just copy the entire body. So what I'm going to do is copy the entire body. So on the word body, I'm going to copy and copy element. And once I copy the element, I'm going to come over into our app and I'm going to get rid of all of this. I'm going to say, boom, delete. And you're going to say, hey, wait a minute. I thought you said we need a div. Well, yeah, we absolutely do. So watch what happens when I paste this in. Remember, I copied the body tag. So in here, I said copy element on the word body. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to paste this in. So I'm going to paste that in and I'm going to save it. Now, we are going to have some problems and it will complain, but the complaints aren't going to be what we think. So we're going to come back to our React app and we see, oh, wait a minute, module build failed from this place. Syntax error, learn to code, week 7, app.js, expected corresponding JSX closing tag for image. Ah, that's a very different error than what we've gotten before. Still not a great error, still have to look and understand, oh, wait a minute, certain things in HTML are acceptable, certain things in React are not acceptable. So what are we going to do? It says expected or corresponding JSX closing tag. Didn't find one. So it expected it, but it didn't find one. So here at the very end, it's expecting because we don't have a closing tag. So if we look at this div, for example, at the footer, just what's showing up here, or maybe I'll just go up to the top and start from the top. See how we have a div here and then a div down here, and we have a div here and a div here. We have a opening tag and we have a closing tag. Now, that's very critical in HTML as well as React that we need an opening and a closing. If we don't have a closing tag, there's going to be a complaint. So to make this more succinct and to make it more understandable, if I just type in div and got rid of this, and I just left it like this, you can already see the editor starting to complain. And it's like, whoa, there's a problem. We need to fix this. And what is it? Unterminated JSX contents. Okay, so it needs a closing tag. The errors, they are not great. So there's two different errors that we see for the same exact problem. So if I just type in image here instead, we're going to see another problem. So we see unterminated JSX contents. All right, so what do I need to do to fix this whole thing? Pop in this whole thing again. And what it's really complaining about, if you look on the editor on the right-hand side, you'll see these red lines, and these red lines indicate an error. And you can see these squigglies underneath here. So we're going to correct these problems. So there's a few of them throughout. And the first one shows up here under the word image. And I'm going to do this pretty quick because we covered this the last time, but the problem is these all need a closing tag. And so I'm going to highlight Alt coloring or Alt equals coloring, hit Command D, and that'll select each one individually. So I'm going to keep hitting Control D until I've selected all of them, and then come to the very end and put in that closing tag. And if you're looking very carefully, you'll see that the red squigglies disappear. So I'm going to get rid of that, and you'll see the red squigglies coming back here on the sides. Now, if I come back and put /in, the reds disappear. So hopefully it's a very, very subtle difference. I did it to all of them at the same time. Hard to see in the editor itself because that line is a bit long, but I'll show you again what I mean when we come down here to the input. So we've got this line and class format. So I'm just going to hit Command D again, and my cursor exists in two places at the same time. If I were more, there would be 3 at the same time, 4 at the same time, but here I'm just going to pop in a slash and then save, and we're good to go. All right, so see what happens within our React app. Well, in our React app, we end up having this CSS cheat sheet. It looks like our links. Here's our hero section. So we've got the words, we've got the content, but it looks so terrible. This looks awful. It is a web page. It is functional. It does work, but it looks like trash. How do we get that to look like this? All right, so in here again, we're going to copy some code. And in here, we're going to go to the sources. And in here, inside of sources, you'll see this folder called top folder. We're going to expand this out. And inside here, we see this images. Well, that's probably not where we want to go because that's going to contain the images. If we click on it, oh, cool, that's our image. However, we probably want to go to the URL or the domain that we're hosting, which is the same up here. And inside here, there's a folder, spot skill static. And inside here, there's a CSS cheat sheet HTML file, which is very similar to what we just copied. It's got all these sections in it, which if we come back to our code, we've got all of these sections. We've got a contact form, we've got section 3, section 2, section 1, and then we've got our hero and our nav bar. So we've copied this pretty much. And now we're going to go to our style sheet. And inside of our style sheet, this is where we're going to copy all of the CSS. Now, where are we going to put that CSS? Well, we're going to put it into app.js has this accompanying app.css. Okay, that sounds like a pretty logical place to put it. So I'm going to get rid of everything in here. And now I'm going to paste this in. And the second I do that, now we're going to look at a React app. And hey, this is looking much more akin to what we started with, our regular project here. This is on linus-item.github.io. And this is on localhost 3000. Hey, so this is our project. How do I know it's my project? Well, let me get rid of the CSS and we'll see. So I'm going to delete the CSS. I'm going to save it. And hey, my project goes back to looking like trash. All right, sweet. So I am affecting change. I know these two are linked together. I make a change happens. Okay, so I'm going to pop this back in. I'm going to save it. And now our page goes back to this awesome, beautiful color and awesome arrangement. Now this is looking like a legitimate web page. Sweet. All right. Now, today we're going to talk about arrangement. We're going to talk about how to modify this so that components are in their own sort of hierarchy. Because right now, this is all in one gigantic place. A big key with React is to put components into smaller and smaller sections. At the beginning, we talked about having this breaking down code into its smallest component. So how do we do that? This is a bit more complicated. If I want to organize my home, well, I've got to create drawers. I've got to create cabinets. Inside the cabinets, I need shelves. And so I've got to create those cabinets. I've got to create those shelves so that I can organize my home the way I want it to be, so that I can find things much more efficiently. So we're going to do the same thing in here. And a very, very common method, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way, but a very common industry practice is underneath the source folder, because that is where we are, inside app.js, app.css, inside the same folder, we're going to create a folder. We're going to create another folder. And we'll call this folder components. If you ever looked at another project of React and wondered, why do they always do this components folder and how are they creating it? Does it come with React? Does it not come with React? It does not come with React. It is something that we have to create. It is something every developer across the board creates. So everyone has to create this components folder. Now inside this components folder, again, I've created the cabinet. Now I've got to create the shelves, or I've created the drawer. Now I've got to create the separators inside the drawer. And so I'm going to do that again. And inside here, I'm going to create what is called a navbar folder. And inside my navbar folder, I'm going to create a navbar file. Oh man, this is so tedious. So I'm going to create this navbar.js. Cool. And now I have this components navbar.js. And how are we going to link these together? So inside my navbar.js, we are going to create a component. Create a component. So there's kind of two synonymous ways to think about the word component. Component is this entire thing as well as the function inside. So in here, we're going to create a different style of component. Here we saw app.js, we saw function, app, and this way of doing things. There's a different way of doing things in the new way of React building. So I'm going to show you both. So we're going to call this function navbar, and we're going to create it this way. And as you notice, there's probably no sort of errors yet. And I'm going to create this div. And so we're good. So far, no problem. This is my new nav bar. Now, I'm going to try and use this, but we've got to do one more thing before we can use it. And I'm going to show you what that thing is. At the very bottom here, there is a very important line. And just because it's a single line doesn't mean it's important. If it's a single line, it means it's all the more important. It's probably doing some very heavy lifting in the project that we might not be aware of. And so this line is very, very important. And what this line says is, hey, anything that I've created, this export default app, this app function that I have created based on this name, I want it to be accessible to everything else outside of this file. I want to make sure it's a very unique thing within React that files aren't automatically accessible. So you have to force React to say, hey, I want this accessible outside. So I'm going to copy this line and bring it to navbar. And inside of the navbar, I'm going to type it in. And instead of the word app, I'm going to type in the word navbar. So export default navbar. And what I'm going to do inside of my JS now is we have this navbar here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this whole thing. So goodbye navbar. And don't worry, we'll claim it back in a bit. But I'm going to type in this really weird syntax as if it's a tag of its own. And I'm going to type in navbar. And React is really kind. I should say Visual Studio Code is really kind. It knows, because I've typed in export default, it knows that the navbar is available. And I can type in navbar here. And when I do this, just watch what happens. It'll be very subtle. It'll be really hard to notice right away, but just see if you can spot what happens. I'm going to click this and boom. So hopefully it didn't go by too fast or too unnoticed, but up here, there's a sort of import navbar from components navbar. Whoa, okay, so this is automatically doing something that I needed to do. If I want to use this navbar component, I do have to import it. The syntax is weird. I get it. Why can't the program just know what I want to do and do it? We're not there yet. One day it will, but not today. So here, import navbar from the components navbar, and there we go. Now, this is a open tag, and we can just do this and it'll work. Or a simpler syntax is this / and put in that closing tag. And hopefully that closing tag, that / is really, really familiar from when we did this thing here at the end of alt coloring for the image. So hopefully that looks familiar. But I'm going to save this and we're going to go back to our React page and see what happened. So the nav bar is up at the very top. And oh, wait, this is my nav bar. But wait a minute, it's supposed to look like CSS cheat sheet, home services, and about. Where did that go? Well, this is my nav bar. I created the nav bar and it was done correctly. So what if I want to use this? What if I want to come back and do this inside of here? Okay, cool, great question. So I'm going to go back here just to save time. And I'm going to type in, I'm going to copy this element. I'm going to come back here. And inside of the navbar.js, this is my new navbar. We're going to get rid of this. I just wanted to show what that looks like. We're just going to paste this in. Done. And we're going to save it. All right. So we have our opening div up here. We've got our closing div down here. Everything else in here is wrapped in these two divs. All right. So now let's go back to our React page and see what happens. Hey, that's better. There's our CSS cheat sheet. We got home, services, and about. Very cool. So now we've got our first component created. That was our very first component. And I'm going to spend some time on this particular component. I am going to show you different ways to create components. So I'm going to show you the other way to do this. So I'm going to comment all this out. Component creation method 1. I guess I'll leave it up to you on which you want to use. So here I'm going to create component creation method 2. This method is what you will find much more frequently in coding. It will be the export const. Actually, before we do that, const navbar equals. This is what's called an arrow function. And everything else remains the same. Now, the difference between this const and this function is the word function automatically implies that it is a function. This method turns a variable into a function. So turns a variable into a function. If you aren't sure what const is, we reviewed what consts are, what vars are, what lets are. There's three kinds of variables in the JavaScript world. So you can go back to week 5 and review what a const is, but essentially a const is a variable that doesn't change. It's not allowed to change. And so this is a very common practice because people are trying to move into this style of coding as opposed to function style of coding. Just a trend in the industry. Up to you on how you want to execute it. But in here, I'm going to paste in that code again of our nav bar, and we're going to save this. But we're going to have a problem because there's a very critical line that we haven't included. And in here, we're going to say export default was not found in the nav bar. So module has no exports. Hey, very cool. Thanks for letting me know. Awesome. Now, if I came back to app.js and I didn't have this in here, and I don't have my export, now, if I try to import the nav bar, I don't see it. Like I see the word nav bar here, but there's no appending components location thing here that I saw before. So I'm going to add in the exports and I'm going to come back to here and we'll see what happens. So here we have export default, nav bar. Save this. And I'm going to come back to app.js and I'm going to come back here and I'm going to type in navbar, and hey, it changed. There's this components navbar thing now. Hey, Visual Studio Code updated, and now I can type that in, close that tag off, save it, and hey, nothing changes on the page. Everything looks great. It's all functional and working now. Cool. All right, so I'm going to show you the third way to do it. In my opinion, the most efficient way, if I know I've only got one component. If I've got multiple components, then it's a different story, and we'll talk about that at a later date. But I'm going to comment all this out and come down and combine all of these into one. So we'll do an export const nav bar equals open parenthesis arrow function and open bracket return parentheses. You are going to lose your mind in the beginning. I promise you, it will be so hard to remember parentheses or open bracket in the beginning. It is rough. Arrow function. Which one needs the arrow? Which one doesn't need the arrow? Did I forget it? Did I not forget it? And the errors are going to suck. This takes time. It will not be fun. Syntax is the worst part of coding, aside from the logic. The logic just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to begin with. But speaking computer, it is rough. This is learning a new language, literally learning the rules of a new language. I digress. So coming back, I'm going to paste in the nav bar, and we're going to run it. And hey, we've got this export default was not found. Wait a minute. Why? I didn't export const navbar. So if I come back to app.js, the syntax changes slightly. So let's do this. Did I not do that right? I don't know why, but we'll see. So I took out the navbar, error goes away, and I see navbar components navbar. Oh, ooh, we have a slight syntax change, everybody. Wait a second. Let's take a look at this. What's going on? Wait a minute. Whoa, I'm losing my mind here. I could have sworn the last two didn't have these little swirly brackets around the nav bar. You're not losing your mind. React is just really, really tricky to learn. And the subtle differences between code is very critical. Ugh, it's annoying. But clearly it's working. So there's a big difference between export const navbar, between this one and these two above. So function navbar export default, const navbar export default. This export default assumes there's only one. So I'm going to type this down below. Export default assumes only a single component is in the file. Export the component. Method 3 allows for multiple components in a file. So I'm going to break this down. Export defaults, methods 1 and 2. Assume only a single component is in the file. Export component. Method 3 allows for multiple components in a file. So here, if I wanted to copy this and put it down below and say export navbar 2, I can do that. I can easily do that. But for the first two methods, I can't really say export default anymore. I have to export navbar2. So for the first two up here, so I'm just going to recommend, like, to be honest, go with this method. It just makes it simpler, makes it easier. You can build much faster. Export const navbar, export const navbar2. I'm going to pop in both of these just to show you how they work, but inside app.js, now I can go to navbar2. And we'll see what happens to that top line here, because Visual Studio Code will automatically modify it, but navbar2, components, navbar, and once I click this, hey, navbar2 gets automatically appended, and now I add it, and inside of my project, I have a second navbar that shows up. It's identical because we didn't change it. So we've got this identical navbar that shows up. So my recommendation, again, you can use whatever method you like, whichever one you're comfortable with, but I would recommend just doing the export const. And that way I don't have to mess around with adding the export default at the end of every line. To me, it's just more efficient. But you do have these other two as reference if you want to use those two as well. But I wanted to walk through and just show you when you see this funky syntax up above, because it will come up in the future. Wait a minute, there's something else in this file. So if I got rid of navbar2, and I have this setup here, my thought process is, hey, wait a minute, there's probably some other stuff in this file. There's probably another component in this file. Let me go investigate what's happening in that file and just see what's happening. Oh, cool, there is another component. There's a navbar2 in here. Do I want to use that one? Do I want to use this one? It also allows me to experiment. Maybe I want to change something in navbar2 and I want to say navbar2 logo here instead. And I want to play around with these two different things. I can come to app.js, I can import navbar2, and then here I can just say navbar2. And now I can play around with, oh, this one looks better than the previous one. Cool, I want the previous one, I don't want this one. I can play around with that. So from a comparison perspective, from a workshopping, from a testing out code, I can set up one and then experiment with the other. I can run them side by side, as we saw earlier. Up to you. All right. So that was a really long tangent on a component of navbar.js. So what we're going to do is break out these into their own components now. So we've seen how to do one component, and we've gone into sort of the ins and outs. I'm going to change this back to just regular navbar up here so it's not confusing. So I'm just going to do navbar, and we're going to drop this one out. And then our code comes back to CSS cheat sheet. So we're just staying consistent. That's all. So I'm going to do the same thing with the hero class here. So we've got a hero class. What I'm going to do is inside the components folder, I'm going to create a component. I'm going to call this the hero folder. And inside the hero folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this hero.js. And so what's going to happen here? Export const hero equals open parenthesis, open bracket, return parenthesis, and inside of the hero, I'm going to paste in, wrong one. I got to paste in the hero section. Sorry about that, app.js. I thought I had copied this correctly. I did not. So I'm going to cut this out, go to hero.js, paste this in, and we're going to save this. So now we've got that. I'm going to come back to app.js, and in here, I'm going to type in hero, and automatically in Visual Studio Code, it's got the components hero, and we'll see the import up here. Import, open, close bracket, hero. And then it's coming from the components hero folder. And I'm going to close that tag, save it, and now we've got our hero section. If I didn't want to showcase that hero section, I'm just going to comment that out, save it, and we see, hey, that hero section is gone now. I see section 1 now. So hero section's gone. So I know it's in there correctly functioning. So I'm going to prop in the hero section again, and I'm going to save it, and we're going to see our page change, and boom, there it is again. I know on my screen it's a little bit hard to see because I've got overlapping windows. Maybe in the future I'll have like 2 or 3 monitors, so it's easier for me to code and show at the same time. But I'm working off of 1 monitor at the moment. So now we've done our hero section, we've got our components. So hey, we're starting to see a pattern develop. And that's really the thing I want to show is the pattern that is here. The pattern is repeatable. If I see it and understand it, then I can repeat it. And so now we've got the section 1. So I'm going to let you guess what we're going to do. We have this section 1. So what are we going to do? We're probably going to take this section 1 and we are going to create a component for section 1. In section 1, here's the opening div. I'm going to reduce the size of this so you can see the breakdown of the pattern. I know this is probably really small, but the idea is, hey, this div matches with this div up here. So Visual Studio Code automatically does this job of highlighting. So I can take these two and copy all the way from here to here. Also in the section 2, I've already got that class name there, so I know that this is a different class name or a different section. Okay, so inside of our div, copy all this, and I'm going to expand this back up again so we can see it easier. Inside my components, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call this section 1. I'm going to create a file. We're going to call this section 1.js. All right, so inside here, we're going to do our export const section 1. And really, I don't have to call it section 1. I can call it anything I want to. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to call it section 1. Why do I never copy the right thing? Okay, let's copy this time. I know I'm going to screw that up, but cut that out. And we're going to come back to section 1 and paste it in. And then save it. And we'll come back to app.js. And we're going to save this, and we're going to see, oh, section 1 disappeared. I didn't add it in. Oh, no, where did it go? Well, I can just add in section 1. And there we go. Section 1 shows back up. And so now we can see the mix. We have a components, we have some components, and we have these sections. All right, so let's do section 2, 3, and then the contact us form and the footer. So we got a few more to go. So hopefully I'm going to do these next few a little bit faster. So let's go to components. And on the components, we're going to go to section 2. And inside section 2, we're going to create a file, section2.js. Section 2. Return. And then inside here, we're going to take our section 2, cut that out, go to section 2, paste it in, save it. Inside app.js, we're going to add in section 2. And we can see, hey, down here at the very bottom, there's section 2. Close that tag, and then nothing changes on our page because we've already got section 2 here. If I took that out and I want to make sure it's there, cool, section 2 just disappeared. We've got section 1, section 3, but section 2, I'm going to pop that back in, and there it is. Okay. And then section 3. So one thing I do want to highlight is the responsiveness. This is a really, really, really quick responsive update that I'm getting. I'm getting this feedback really fast. Are things working? Are they not working? The feedback is awesome. That's the really big improvement between regular HTML and React. React plugs in this live coding development environment where below it's always kind of watching for the changes. And once the changes happen, it automatically pushes them to the screen. And so I don't have to come to here and hit the refresh. So if you saw in the previous weeks 1, 2, and 3, I kept coming to the browser and hitting refresh, kept coming to the browser and hitting refresh. React does that automatically for me. So my coding experience becomes so much faster. And that's the real beauty around JavaScript style coding is the updates are instantaneous pretty much. So in here, we've got section 3, and let's grab it. Section 3. Boom, and boom. And there's a slight problem in here. Oh no, can anyone point out the problem? So there's an issue up here. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. But if you see it, put it in the chat. See if you can tell me where I went wrong. See if you can tell me where the issue is. Where's the typo? Or you can unmute yourself. I'm trying to make this interactive, but it's okay if you're feeling shy. But for any of you that guessed it, there will be a problem between here and here, and there will be an equal sign that is needed here to be able to correct that and rectify it. So, boom, save that, and we are good to go. So after that, now I can come back to my app.js, and I can come and do section 3. And there's my section 3. And if I go back up, I'll be able to see, hey, all of these are following a pattern. They all come from different files, but there's multiple options within that file. They're component exports. Awesome. So here's my section 3, and I'll save this. And oh no, what happened here? Syntax error. I have an issue. Section 3 doesn't have any closing tag. Man, I forgot that one. There we go. So now I have my section 3 in the closing tag, and it pops up. And lastly, well, 2 more components. We'll do the contact us, and then we'll do the footer. So contact form, and then contact form dot JS. Inside here, export const contact form equals open parenthesis, arrow function, open bracket, return, open parenthesis. And inside, I'm going to copy everything in the contact and cut it out. Come to the contact form, paste it in, and then in our app.js, we will pop in contact form. And then finally, I have this footer section. So in the components, footer, create a file, footer.js, and whoops, I can't pop that in directly. I need my export const footer equals, and the return. And finally, I can pop that in. And then inside of our app.js, we can pop in the footer. So now if I take a look at our whole page, we have everything in our individual components, and our main page is looking really, really slim. We went from this huge, massive thing to this nice, tiny, like very concise, very efficient looking code in our page. So this is it. This is my whole app. And then everything in here looks very clean. Hey, here's a section, here's another section. And so now I can modify each section individually as opposed to maybe taking the chance of messing up the whole thing. In here, there's still a change I'd want to make. And there's this thing called body up here and body down here. So it really shouldn't be the word body, but it should be the word div. And inside there, I want to change that because div is the more standard. Body works because it's a tag, so it's okay. And then up here, we have this error coming down here. I should say more of a warning coming down here that something is defined but never used. And so since we're not using the logo at all, we can just go ahead and delete that, and we're good to go. So we've successfully compiled everything. Things are green. Green is good, generally speaking. So now that we've got all of this, we're good to go. Our components have been defined. The way our app is structured is great. It looks awesome. So we've got sections 1, 2, 3, the footer, the contact form, and the nav bar. So our app is pretty much functional. There are some things that I definitely want to show you on how to clean things up. And so what we've done so far is gone into the cleanup or the components function of this. So we've done the components and the hierarchy of components. And so I'm going to pause there. And if you have any questions or if you want some review, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the CSS styling of the modules and how to incorporate styling into our CSS. So one thing that's very important is to not have too much static code. We want one place for static code and every other place to reference that static code. Now, what do I mean by that? inside of every one of these components. So if I focus on the nav bar and I go into the nav bar, all of these class names are very static and they show up a bunch of times. So navbar menu link 1, 2, and 3. If I want to change this CSS tag, oh man, I got to change it in one place, in two places, in three places. This is going to be painful. Imagine if I had this style throughout my entire page, or if I go to section 1 and I want to change the header of everything. Oh, I got to change section 1 header, section header. I got to change all this stuff throughout all these different places. Well, what if I just want to have one place to change it and that's it? So what I can do, I mean, in here it's text. And so if I make a change to this one, let's just hypothetically say I make a change. I'll go back to the navbar and I'll make a change to navbar and I'll make this one, I'll use the word 1 here. I made a typo. So we'll put in the word typo here. And I know this example might not make a whole lot of sense in live coding like this, but I want to basically make sure that you see, oh, I've made a typo. I've made a mistake in here. I've stuck in an extra letter in here that I can't quite see properly. And so when I come to my page, I might have some issues here. Oh man, that doesn't show up properly. I want something to show up where it actually does screw up the page. Maybe I get rid of it. I don't know. We'll see if that works as well. Nope, doesn't really work too well because my CSS is too good. Son of a. All right. So, whoops. But I basically kind of want to show this idea that if I screw up a menu link or something like that, I put in a typo somewhere, then I want some type of error to occur. I want something to show up here where it's a problem. And maybe I'll just do it on the main navbar. I pop in a typo here. Trying to break my own code is hard. Why is this not coming up? Interesting. Why can I not break this code? Oh, I'm doing it in the wrong place. Ah, that's a problem. That would explain it. So there we go. So I popped in a typo and I was doing it in the wrong component. So obviously make sure we're doing the right component, breaking code in the right way. But we can see, oh, this changed up and I don't know what I did. I came in here and I made a typo inside of my code, inside the raw text here. I don't want to make changes inside the raw text. I'd want changes to be more in a central way where I don't want to have to navigate between this nav bar and then this whole CSS thing between these two things. So what I'm going to do is start to break out this CSS into its own modular components. I've done that with the HTML. The HTML we did and broke out into its own components. So now we're going to break out the CSS into its own components. And so what does that mean? That means that, let me close out a bunch of these files because that's getting annoying at the very top. What that means is inside of each one of these folders, I'm going to have a module.css. So I'm going to copy, or I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this navbar.module.css. All right, so inside the navbar module CSS, I'm going to pop in everything pertinent for the navbar directly. So what does that mean? Inside of here, if I've done my CSS correctly, I've got my root information and my global parameters up at the top, and then I'll start to see my individual navbar options. And then I'll start to see my individual hero section options. I'll start to see my individual section 1 CSS, my individual section 2 CSS. So this is stuff that I've done so that I can create sort of a hierarchy. When we get into the live coding session, I'll show you how to do this and think through it a little bit more clearly. But for now, just to get you familiar with React, I've done this work for you so that we can move along with the structure. And then we're going to come back and do all of this together in the next couple of weeks. And then there's our contact, and then finally our footer. And then below that is all our media queries. And our media queries are ways to change this into a responsive design. So what I'm going to do is take in our navbar and I'm going to delete it from here. So we've got the navbar and boom, navbar all the way down to here. And I'm going to delete it from here. And I'm going to save this. And then our page looks like trash. It doesn't look that great at all. So here's our navbar. Let me get rid of that typo word as well. So even if I got rid of the typo word, our navbar doesn't look great at all. We've got CSS cheat sheet, home, services, and about. Okay, cool. I'm going to come into navbar module and paste this in, and we'll just see what happens. So I've pasted that in, and then there's still no update to this one because I don't know where the CSS module lives. So there's a couple different ways to work with this. I can either import import dot slash navbar dot module dot CSS. If I do that, I should be able to. That should work, but maybe not. Let me see one thing. Yeah, that does not work. I was hoping this would work, but it doesn't. All right, the better way, the way that should work, is styles from dot slash navbar dot module dot CSS. Now, that way, we're going to change up all the syntax here. And this is where React can get really, really clumsy. But we're going to change the word class, and this is universal. We do have to do this anyway to class name. And then we're going to change up all of these to, instead of navbar, we're going to get rid of the quotes. And we're going to type in a open bracket, and we're going to type in styles dot navbar. And so automatically when we do that, we turn this into a variable and we see, hey, CSS cheat sheet and our home services and about. So automatically we've linked our CSS module from styles to the class name styles.navbar. So we took the original form of what it was and we changed it into this really weird thing. Now, why did we do that? So if I change this to navbar, let's say typo, what I'm hoping for is that we would see an error somewhere, which I don't know if we will or not. That was what I was hoping for, an error. But we go to the console, we see this, but we don't see an error. That's what I was hoping to show, but maybe not. All right. That is something I probably got to figure out why we're not getting an error for that, if there is an error for that. But regardless, I need to change this over to a styles.navbar so that when we want to reference this, we only have to change it kind of in one place, and then we don't have to change too much in here. So everything inside of our div or inside of our component should be something along the lines of a variable, not a hard-coded text or static text. So this is now a variable, not static text. This is very annoying, but when you get into corporate settings, when you get into professional settings, you will see a lot more of this style of coding, even though it is very cumbersome. But the idea is to not have these words, but have more variables. So that when we come to our page, we'll be able to change these things much easier if they're variables as opposed to static names. So we're going to go ahead and change these and pop this into styles.navbar. And this part does get very tedious and cumbersome. So, and I'm going to change these all at the same time. So 3. Oh, that was the wrong one. Just want to change up these. There we go. So, boom, boom, and boom. So there we go. So now we've got our CSS cheat sheet, and I'm only going to do it for the navbar. To be honest, this is so annoying to do, but once you understand like the nuances of coding and the pattern of having only one place that has static content like this, so this is considered static content because it's a word we can change. It is not a variable. These are just static words. Then we can come in here and create variables to reference. So inside of our actual code, we want to get away from anything in quotes. So even here, I should have like a file that has links, or maybe links are okay. It just depends on standard coding practices. But inside our class names, we really want to reference CSS outside in a separate module. I'm not going to go through and do that for each one of these because it gets cumbersome and tedious. But there is one big takeaway that I do want to show you here, and that is if we go back to our developer tools, here we're going to see some syntax issues. And the syntax issues is really class versus class name. In HTML, we see this word class quite a bit to represent a CSS identifier. So if you were with me for weeks 1, 2, and 3, this word came up quite a bit in terms of referencing CSS properties. So class is a very, very important component of HTML and web development. It allows us to pull in CSS and allows us to change elements or call elements. So this word changes in React, and it's very annoying because React is a language of itself and class is a protected word in React. So therefore, in object-oriented programming, there are classes. So React made a decision to say, hey, we'll make a distinction between the two, and we'll just append it to class name in React. So CSS can now be referred to as class name. So if we come into, let's just say our contact form, our first one, we're going to change all these classes to class name. So we don't have that confusion. Now, will this work? Absolutely. Will it work as class? No problem. It will. Just know that it might go away in the future and your whole project will break if you don't have class name. So very important to have this word class name. So I'm just going to change that up so we can get rid of that error. And we're pretty much kind of at the end of hierarchy and completion for all of this. I did want to show this navbar module thing. It is super annoying, but something you'll see in more corporate settings. Is it something you'd want to do for your own project? I would say get in the habit of it because it is going to come up quite a bit when you start to code for other people or start to code in your own career for your own freelance projects. It is something that will come up. And so hopefully we can then get rid of this error by changing up the last one and save this. And hopefully this now goes away. Yay, all those went away, sweet. And we're left with this one thing as well. And the word for is also a protected word in React. So for is indicative of a for loop. Although we're not using the for loop here, so we're just using the word for. And in here, we can change it to HTML4. And what is it referring to? It doesn't really tell me where this error is. Maybe it does, but I'm not seeing it. But it just says React DOM JS86. So if I click there, it's like, hey, you're not really giving me anything to go off of. Where are you telling me? Since I know where this is, because we're dealing with a contact form and it's an input, it is here. So I'm going to come here and I think it's HTML4. Yes, HTML4. I'm just going to type this in, HTML, and change it up to camel case and HTML4. And this error should go away now. Oh no, where is it? For label div. Maybe I didn't change it in the right place, but yeah, I thought I did. Yeah, maybe I'll Google that one and figure out exactly how the syntax should work. But it's all good for now. All right. So moving on, what we did is basically in our app.js, we've basically cleaned it up to where we have only these few components, and then I can take out components, put in components as I want to. My code has become much more modular. I can remove this cabinet from my entire ecosystem if I want to. I can put it in if I want to. So there's quite a bit of functionality that I have, flexibility that I have now. And then each one of these elements is now in their own sort of container. And so if I want to make a change to the nav bar, change up a style, I can come to the individual nav bar and let's just say change up the color here if I wanted to, or change up certain things in here that I wanted to. I think it might make it more sense if I went to section 1 inside the app CSS and change it there. But the main idea is now I've got much more flexibility to be able to change things as I want to because the CSS is separate, the HTML is separate. And eventually I would have a very slimmed down CSS here where I'd only have maybe these few components. No matter what, this CSS will always be globally aware because inside of app.js, we're importing app CSS. So this is automatically going to take over as the default for the entire project. And then what sits on top of that is this index CSS, which comes from index.js. So import index CSS. These are your global variables. I'll let you play around with how you want to define these, but generally speaking, we would break out the global, these few up top here, the ones that relate to kind of like the entire web page. So these few, I would put these into the index CSS, and then individuals, I would put into their individual folder CSSs and link them through style components. And then finally, the media queries at the bottom, I would do these within the individual components as well. So here, I think there's media queries. If you're not familiar with media queries are responsive design. So if we jump into doing this one again, we can see that section 1 and section 2, watch carefully what happens as I expand this. And we get closer to 600 pixels wide. Watch really, really carefully. And it'll happen right about now. And so we've got that section 3 box. So automatically there's section 2, section 1, section 2, and we have a section 3 that shows up. Where did that section 3 show up from? It's called a media query. It's just responsive design. And so we can see the text size changes, the arrangement changes. We're getting rid of an entire section. Even the color scheme kind of changes. So there's a lot of controls that we have from the media query aspect of it that I would put into individual sections as well. So I know that was quite a bit on the sectionality and some of the best practices. I am annoyed with CSS, as you probably heard, that breaking this down from this component into these modular components, it is such a tedious experience or such a tedious task, but it is one that should be done on every project just to break out the CSS and to keep it simple, because CSS is so finicky and so tricky to use. It is best to do it in these modules so that when we have to troubleshoot, it makes it easier to focus on a single component as opposed to global changes. And what I mean by that is if I inside app CSS decide to change just something in here and decide to change kind of a global sort of setting, it can affect the layout of the entire page. I'm trying to think of something I can do in here, but so far the web page is pretty simple. But if I did something along the lines of in the hero display, flex direction is a column. If I decided to do that on the page, well then now when we come back to here, we're going to have something that looks really terrible and ugly, and that could change my whole entire layout or look and feel of my site. And so we know these little things affect how people respond to our site when they first come. And so I'm going to get rid of this, but if that's locked into its own hero page, then it won't affect anything else on the page, and automatically we can see it pop back into its own section. So, or if I affected the image, maybe that's a better one. Let's go to the image, and let's just say image width is 150% or 200%. And so that's going to change up quite a few of these, and all the images are now screwed. Oh no, what I want to do is probably change up the image only in its section, not globally. And so changing that back to 70%, now it brings it down to where I wanted it to be originally. And so that I have individual control over the image itself. So I wanted to pause there. I know that was a lot that we kind of went over, but the main ideas that we really want to cover are the component section of starting off with sort of this whole big component here. I want to copy this again and kind of just show what we did. If I got rid of all of this and popped in that web page, we'll see where we were at and where we went to and the advantages and disadvantages. So if I just clean this up again, pop in the image, because it will complain about this, and forward slash, and then I come down here to our inputs, and we have forward slash and forward slash. So if I come here and I do this, everything looks the same. Everything looks well, I did forget that I took out the component from out CSS, which is fine. But if I look at this component here, it looks terrible. There's so much stuff going on in here. It is really hard to tell where to make changes, how to look at this. But if I go back to the way things kind of how we had them before, this is so much simpler to look at. This is just, oh, I know there's a navbar section, a hero section, a section 1, 2, 3, and a contact form. Super simple. And I can save this, and all of a sudden I've got my page and we're good to go. So just in terms of troubleshooting, being able to look at a page, being able to understand what's going on, I know exactly where to look. So organization is so critical in not just React, but HTML. And then obviously, hopefully you have a clean home, but this is hopefully an idea to relate to creating a cabinet, creating a shelving system, or creating separators for forks, spoons, knives in the drawers. But that's the idea. The last component I did want to touch today, because we have some time, is a completely separate topic, but that separate topic is probably going to come up quite a bit. We've talked about CSS, and CSS is a major pain to use. You got to know it, you got to understand it, and I highly recommend diving into CSS because everything else will make sense. I strongly recommend getting familiar with padding, getting familiar with margins, getting familiar with the box concept, flexbox, width, height, how to control each component properly. I strongly recommend doing that before jumping into a external thing called Bootstrap. So I'm going to type in Bootstrap getting started, and this is a plugin component that we can use on our web pages to be able to just pop in CSS in line with the uh, code that we're using. So if I want to use Bootstrap, I've got to plug this into the browser directly. And there's a couple ways to do it, but here we've got CDN links and JSS links or JS links. So what I'm going to do is copy these and we'll be able to see how that works. What I want to do is, where's our link? Where's our standard? There we go. Here's our standard Bootstrap link. So I'm going to copy this one. I don't want to copy the whole header, but I just wanted to copy the link component, but that is not there. All right. Yeah, they changed up the code. All right. So in here, there's going to be a link reference and there's going to be a JS. For right now, I'll copy in both just so you can see it. Inside of our public folder, there's an index.html file. This is the main file that runs the entire project. Inside of here, everything plugs into this root. So hopefully this looks familiar. If I got rid of all this green stuff, it would be a lot less intimidating and it would look much more like the HTML we've seen in the past. And so we can see, hey, here's our head section and here's our body section. Inside of our head section, there's a whole lot of stuff there, but inside of our body, there's just this sort of no script and that's it. And so root and that's it. And so inside of our head, we've got, hey, there's a couple of links, there's meta tags, but really it's all pretty standard stuff. If I want to change the title, I can change it here, no problem. But I'm going to toss in this link. Normally we would toss in a CSS link in here, but this time I'm going to toss in this CSS link in here. And so let that compile. And then at the very end, I am going to pop in these two scripts as well. So copy these to the clipboard and put them into just below the link. And so I've got these 3 lines that will allow me to use different features of Bootstrap. And why am I showing Bootstrap? So I'm going to show just one of the cooler features in Bootstrap, which is a table. And inside of a table, it's a pretty standard table. Tables aren't exactly fun to create in HTML. They look terrible. But I'm going to go into our app.js, and inside of our app.js, I'm going to create a div at the very top. And this isn't going to look beautiful at all, but this is going to be a div, and this is going to be a table of sorts. And so we're going to call this, what is it? Table element. I can't even remember, to be honest. I'd have to look up like HTML table and look up the generic but we're gonna make this into a Bootstrap style table. There we go. So we're just gonna copy this, and this is gonna look absolutely horrific. So if we copy that table and we come into a project, this is what it kind of comes out looking like. And it's not very pretty at all. Not good looking. It's okay. It's got some functionality, but we can already see that if I took away the Bootstrap components, so if I come here and I remove these components and then save it, our table changes dramatically. We've got some styling there, but not anything great. And then if I pop that back in, we've got some more additional styling that kind of comes up. But if I want to change up different colors or change up different things in there, let's just copy this table and see what the difference between the two would be in terms of just appearance. So coming into here, we're going to pop in a different table and save this one. And now when I come to our React app, this table is a Bootstrap table. So much nicer, so much cleaner. It's got spacing, it's got columns, it's got widths per column. So if I look at the default way that HTML kind of constructs tables, I've got to do a lot of CSS manipulation to get it to go to something like this. That's the power of Bootstrap, where it automatically has all the stuff that is built into the browser. It's kind of built into the CDN that we're pulling it from. So there's two options: either have it locally or call it from the CDN. But that's what we're doing here. And then we can attach different colors. So if I want to create this table up here, very simple. I can copy this as well and Control C. And inside of here, I will create a third table, and we'll be able to have styles come up really, really, really quickly. That is not what I want there. That is not what I want there. And that should be good. So if I come back here to our React app, we see, oh, why did that not come up? Did I? Oh, that's why, because man, I was hoping that would have worked. I was hoping that I would have been able to copy inside there. Nah, that didn't work. Oh, they're not giving me the full code in here. But all right, let's just say I delete this one. This is an ad hoc kind of display, so apologies if I didn't prepare well for showing off Bootstrap and the powers of it, but we can mess around with this one. And we've got table, and so I'm going to make it a striped table. So we'll just go table striped. And if I want to make that a striped table, now every other row will change up to a striped table. So these are built-in styles that I can add in, and I can use a variant in here. And I think I can use the word variant equals to dark. And that should, maybe I'm wrong on that one. What was the name? Oh, table primary. There we go. Table dark. Table dark. So I can change this up to table dark. And that should change this up to a striped table dark. So it's got a look or a different look and feel to it. And so there's a lot more styling options that come built in out of the box that I can just append to the class. I no longer need this CSS file associated with everything that I'm doing. So this is a way to move into a different way to style components. And I know this might be confusing. I know my examples aren't that great because I'm tossing in this kind of like last minute idea of Bootstrap with CSS. Probably the next time I run the class, I'll have a better baked in version of Bootstrap, but hopefully you're able to see like, oh, okay, I can do tables. I can also do styling. I can also do a lot of other things in terms of forms, in terms of columns, in terms of sort of how to arrange items. So if I have a specific, I want to arrange items, I want to arrange them at the top, in the middle, or at the bottom. I've got different ways to be able to do that here. If I want to arrange items in a stacked ladder style, I can do that as well. And then I can do horizontal alignments. And there's also a ton of different ways that I can, let me see if I can show containers. There's the accordion feature where you just want to click on an item, bring it up or down. This is really nice for like wiki style, informational style pages. And so all of this comes within Bootstrap automatically, where it does involve quite a bit of CSS that I don't have to type out by hand. I can do this all by hand, but wow, is it going to be painful. I challenge you to do it by hand. I personally have never done this by hand, but by all means, you're going to use CSS animations, some JavaScript. But yeah, in here, Bootstrap does take care of a lot of it for you. There are other libraries like Google's Material IO that do something very, very similar. So play around with different styles of libraries and different ways to append or different ways to add customizations to your apps. But I personally like Bootstrap just because the documentation is so clear and easy for me to understand and use. They have an example. Hey, I want this. And down below is the code for how to get it. If I want different styles and I want different sort of accordion ways, they've got various different styles built in. And then if I want to must or customize them even more, I can do that as well. So um, a lot of different ideas, and you've probably seen these on web pages quite a bit, like all these different button styles. And so I did want to give an introduction to Bootstrap and how to plug it into your app. The primary thing we're going to need is, if I go back to my getting started introduction, in here, there is a link component that we're going to need. So this link component right here, and then these two scripts, and you can stack them kind of on top of one another. If you take a look at this script tag here, it'll be the same CDN, I believe, as what's happening down here. Should be a, oh, this is a bundle. Yeah, so this will be your primary script, or you can use this one single line as a bundle as opposed to these two. I just ended up using these two. But these two lines would be all you really need to be able to deliver some type of styling like this, or some type of styling like what we saw earlier with the buttons and with the accordion. All right, so lesson learned for today, I got to get better at representing Bootstrap within the project. Probably going to do that in the next couple of weeks and see how that works out. Maybe I can show a different style of creating a web page without any CSS files, but give me some time to work on that and I'll update it. But just in review, what we did work on today was creating sort of a component header, component hierarchy, really, and creating the components. And there's multiple styles of creating the components. So if I look at the navbar file again, we've got method 1 of creating a component. We've got method 2 of creating a component. So remember, one is a actual true function. The other one is a variable turned into a function. And then the third one is really just taking and exporting a variable turned into a function. This is the method I prefer. I think it's easier. And then finally, what we wanted to end up with is something that looks, I'm going to delete all this just to make it just a level set and get back to where we were. But this is kind of where we want to end up, in this nice sort of easy to understand, where are we getting our components from? Can I look at the individual component, and can I then modify the individual component, troubleshoot the individual component, add to the individual component as well. But I really want to break it down to its each individual core sort of idea or theme, individual box. If you were here with me for week 1, we covered this idea of boxes. So if I look at sort of a web page, each one of these sections is a box. We've got the navbar box, we've got the hero box, section 1, section 2, section 3, contact and footer boxes. If I break these out into the individual components, then I can start to work on each individual box. Hopefully that idea makes sense. Hopefully you're starting to see a pattern. That's really the idea here, is to get to see a pattern. So I'm going to pause there. I know today was probably a lot, probably really confusing, but hopefully today you got to see, hey, there's a pattern to all of this. And as long as I can see the pattern, then I can make coding much more easy to digest, much simpler to access. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, but we've pretty much come to the end of today. But yeah, hopefully this was informative. Hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to unmute and ask any questions. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I will see you guys next week. And next week, I am debating whether or not to do a Bootstrap CSS or jump into the contact form. But let me think about it, and I'll let you guys know what the plan is for next week. But all right, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully this was helpful, and see you next week. All right, everybody. Bye, y'all. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.